All right. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for continuing with us during the Howard County Get It Done Week. This is our webinar on conflict resolution this afternoon. Thank you to Daniel Dykes with the Mediation and Conflict Resolution Center, who is joining us to present this afternoon. You'll see the screen here. We have the Howard County Get It Done Week sessions that are on offer throughout the week. Some of you may have been joining us for some of the sessions earlier. Just wanted to point out one thing to you, that Daniel is available. If you scroll kind of to the bottom of the page here, and that website is speakeasyhoward.org/getitdone. You scroll down, you'll see today's session, conflict resolution, and Daniel has offered some time to provide one-on-one appointments or help for anyone that's interested. So if you click this button here to sign up for virtual help, you'll see we have a few more slots available today at 4 and 4:30. So if you leave today's webinar and you think I'd like a little bit more one-on-one guidance or advice, feel free to snatch those appointments up. Daniel will be available this afternoon. But with that, I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you again, Daniel, for being with us this afternoon, and I'll hand it off to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tiffany. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I just want to call everyone to be aware of their posture and their chair right now, if you happen to be sitting. And if you haven't taken some time to take a deep breath, please do that right now. Just check in with yourself and see how you're feeling today. Our conversation is really not going to dip too far into any content which would be triggering for anyone. But throughout this conversation, please take care of yourself, whatever that means for you. So again, not really going to go too far into any very heady subjects. I am going to mention death a few times. But outside of that, please take care of yourself, make yourself comfortable, and get yourself ready for today's webinar. I want to be sharing my screen for most of this, but just while I have you here, my name is Daniel Dykes. I'm the acting director of MCRC Howard County. We provide free or sliding scale mediation and other services for the community, and I'll give you some more info on that towards the end of my presentation. But just a little bit about me. I'm from the Eastern Shore of Maryland. I've had a lot of experiences with end-of-life conflict through the work that I do. So I've mediated for graveside brawls, arguments over power of attorney, people that are in conflict over what end of life looks like. And I've also had a lot of situations that touch my personal life around end of life care. I was a primary caregiver for my grandmother for the last 9 years of the last 9 months of her life. And also have been present for a lot of other folks as they transition. So the work of kind of getting it done, of being ready for that end of life transition, is something that really touches me deeply. And throughout this conversation, you do have a Q&A section down there. So if anything that I said that comes up for you and you want to shoot me a question like in real time, I'd be happy to try and answer that for you. If not, I will be stopping right at 2:30 and use about 10 or 15 minutes to answer any other questions that people might have. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Right. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Yes?
Oh, we're good.
Great. Thank you. So there's our phone number and email address. That'll be, again, at the very end. But if you want to go ahead and jot that down right now for communicating with us. So we are a Howard County nonprofit. We serve anyone in Howard County with our services. And it's our goal to provide accessible and affordable conflict resolution services and education for everyone, and help people to manage their conversations in a meaningful and proactive way. So we are here to help you with your conflict. And that's one of our main services, is to be able to help folks mediate conflicts around end of life care. But when you think about how conflict informs what you do and how you look at conflict, there's a few things that really goes into how we view conflict. So a few of those things you can see on the screen. One of those things is your history. So generally, the ways that your family or your family of origin experienced or moved through conflict leaves some deep marks in your brain and helps change your view on how you view conflict. So generally, like if you think about your family of origin, where you spent your formative years, and thinking about the conflict that you witnessed from an adolescent age, that still has echoes to today and really forms a lot of our views on conflict. Um, family values as well. So some families treat conflict as an opportunity to grow and to share. Other families may be more conflict avoidant. Some families express love the most by yelling and screaming. Other families are a little quieter. But we each have a very unique experience when it comes to conflict, and our family is really a vehicle of that experience. So, for example, for myself, I grew up in a household with my mother and father, and my father is a Vietnam veteran and suffers from PTSD. So, a lot of my values around conflict came from witnessing my father and my mother being in conflict. And so that really led me to believe that a lot of conflict is to be avoided. And that's one of my main challenges in life is trying to reteach myself how to approach conflict. And also the experiences that you have. You've had many experiences in conflict, perhaps even this week, but specifically those larger conflict experiences, perhaps like the end of a relationship, a conflict that got physical for you. These conflicts and the experiences that we have and our takeaways from them have echoes into the future and really forms the lens that we view conflict with. So all that is to say that you are a complex being and you have only gotten here with a lot of grace, but also being able to move through conflict in your own way. And we each have very different ways of moving through that. But just being aware of, okay, where do my ideas about conflict come from? If you look at how conflict is viewed in our larger society, in American society, there are a lot of examples that America can provide you with how not to do conflict or now how not to move through conflict. But these conversations about conflict may not be happening like overtly, like in your face. But we get a lot of messages about conflict also from media, from music, from any other kind of reading that we do. And so that's how we're kind of forming our opinions on conflict. So it's good for you to check yourself and think like, how comfortable am I with conflict? And what does that look like for me? So there's really five main approaches to conflict. And first of all, there is no right or wrong way to do conflict. There are only ways which create more or less harm for yourself or others. So there is no one approach to conflict, which is a silver bullet in every situation. And in any one situation, you're probably using a blend of two or three of these approaches. So again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. There's no one approach which works better or worse. There's only approaches that create more or less harm for yourself or others. I'm going to kind of go through these pretty quickly since we don't have a lot of time and just go over each one. So the first one you have is compete. So compete is anytime that you're going to go for what you want at any cost. So that is a win-lose competition. So compete is an approach to conflict, like sports is an example of choosing to compete. Competing is any time when you are going to try to get your needs met, regardless of what the other person is thinking or doing. So competing is a valid way to approach conflict in situations where people's safety are at risk, in situations where your security may be at risk, or around any situation that is extremely important to you, or perhaps when you need to make an emergency decision. So say, for example, I will generally compete when it comes to my daughter's safety. When it comes to keeping her safe, that is an area in which that's very win-lose for me. Like I need to make sure that she is safe. But there are costs to competition, and there are costs to each of these approaches. So one of the costs of competition is that you could lose. So what if you are wrong? What if you may not have all the information? These things can really mean losing in a way that fractures your relationships, that loses, you trust with other people and can damage your well-being in other ways. So competing, it can backfire because you can lose. And again, if you're constantly using compete as your mode of getting what you want done, people will know that and generally can portray those folks as being more of a bully. But again, there's no right or wrong way to do this, but compete is one way to do it. Next, we have avoid. So avoiding is anytime you're kind of just disbelieving or not treating the conflict as something that's real. So you may choose to keep your mouth shut when someone says something in a conversation. You may choose to walk the other direction when you see someone in a public space. But avoiding is also a valid way to deal with conflict, especially in the short term. So in the short term, you may choose to avoid in a situation where you are afraid of retaliation. You may choose to avoid in a situation where the other person has a lot of power. Or you may choose to avoid if, say, you're going into a conversation with your sibling about end of life care around your mother, but on that day, your pet had died, you found out your cousin also has COVID, and you're having a really terrible day. So you may choose to avoid that conversation because you're not ready for it, or because you really don't have the milk and honey that's required to get through that conversation. The downsides to avoid, or the costs, is that the conflict will fester. So if you avoid things chronically, it's not going to get better. Generally, the only way through conflict is through it. And so also, if you're choosing avoid as your primary mode of dealing with conflict, your relationships will always stay on a surface level. So one of the great and albeit painful things about conflict is that it deepens our relationships. So if you're always avoiding these deep conversations with folks, your relationship is always going to stay on that surface level, which is okay sometimes. But for the folks who you're going to be helping to make end of life plans with, you need to have a deep and abiding relationship, or at least one that has trust. Next comes accommodation. So accommodating is any time that you're letting the other person have their way. Accommodating can work really well, again, in situations that if you do not have power, or if you have found out that you are wrong. You can also choose to accommodate. Generally, in our society, we, for the most part, will accommodate elders, although this does not happen as much. But people will generally accommodate folks who may be in a lesser position than them as well. So accommodating can be effective to build trust in that relationship. Accommodating can be effective also, just to be honest, if you need to, if you might need something from that person in the future, you may choose to accommodate their needs because you might need to ask them for something soon. And again, you might choose to accommodate someone just based on their environment. So if they're going through a really tough time, you can choose to accommodate their needs. The downside to accommodation is you're not getting your needs met. If you're constantly accommodating, you can also be seen as a doormat, and folks will purposefully or sometimes unpurposefully manipulate that because we are human beings. And also, if you are generally accommodating, you're not building your own ability to speak to your needs. So really, it's one of those things where you have to use it or you lose it. And if you're always accommodating to other people's needs, then who's going to meet yours? Next, we have compromise. So compromise and collaborate gets confused a lot. So just to lay them clear, compromise is technically a lose-lose. So you may get the decision made, but everyone has to give up something, but you each get something as well. So a true compromise is when you are giving up something just to get through that situation. You can choose to compromise in situations where you don't have a lot of trust in that person. So it's a way to kind of build that trust and give to get. Compromise can also work well in situations where you don't have a lot of time or energy to lend to the situation. So it's like, hey, I'll do this for you. Will you do this for me? So it can be more efficient with time. Compromise can backfire or cannot feel good to you because you're not getting all your needs met. So generally, everyone has to give up something, which may be necessary, but all the time, for the most part, folks are leaving that situation with a little bit of dissatisfaction. Collaborate is technically a win-win. That means everyone is generally getting all of their needs met. So true collaboration is something that happens in mediation. So collaboration is when one person shares, like, I would like my mother to be able to die with dignity, and for me that means in-home care. And the other person says, I want to be able to see her as much as possible until she dies. And so a collaboration or win-win would mean what's some solutions that's going to get you the time that you want with your mother, and also a level of dignity at the end of her life. So in mediation, we ask questions like that. Okay, so what's going to be able to meet all of your needs? So collaboration works well when people are in conflict. It works well when you have to make really tough, earth-shattering decisions. So when you're talking about the care of someone else's life, collaboration can be a good tool. The downsides to collaboration is it takes a lot of time and energy. So if you're thinking of deciding, an end of life plan or coming to mediation for an elder care mediation, you can be in mediation for sometimes 2 or 3 2-hour sessions over the period of a couple months. So in our society, that's a big time commitment. And true collaboration, in which everyone is getting all their needs met, takes a lot of time and energy. So if you're choosing to collaborate, you want to make sure that it is worth that time and energy, because you can actually make things worse by trying to collaborate on situations that could be solved with a different approach. But collaboration is kind of held up as the gold standard. Let's collaborate. Mediation is collaboration as well. But I just want to remind you that any one of these are valid approaches to conflict, but again, they just create more or less harm for yourself or others. And again, in any one situation, you can use a blend of these approaches. It's okay to change your approach, and it's actually advisable to change your approach to fit the situation as the situation changes. So it's good to think and reflect upon yourself, like, okay, what is my kind of go-to approach to conflict? Am I a confrontational person that tracks people down for a conversation? Well, okay, then I'm generally a person who competes. Do I let the other person have their way in conversation? Okay, well, then you're an accommodator. So think for yourself about what approaches you normally use, and what approaches that others use as well. I have a question here. I'm going to see if I can read it.
I think it's just a comment singing
Oh,
your
okay.
praises.
Oh, okay. And I can't read the Q&A, so if any
No
more come
worries.
up, could you just read them out to me if any more come up?
Sure. This note says these strategies and your explanations of context are really helpful, Daniel. So thank
Oh,
you.
great. Well, thank you so much. All right. So yeah, again, no approach is always right and no approach is always wrong, and you need to choose the approach to fit the situation. And sometimes this happens in one conversation. I had a conversation recently with my child's school around how they celebrated Thanksgiving. I went into the conversation with my guns blazing. I was there to say, like, hey, I think the way that y'all are celebrating Thanksgiving is offensive. Um, but as soon as I was able to learn more, I changed from competing to more accommodating and listening, before finally trying to collaborate, or I guess compromise is the better word, on like what I want my daughter to participate in at their school. So it's good and actually natural and advisable to change your approach, and that can be hard. We can really become glued to these approaches, and it can feel like giving up, or it can feel like giving something away to change your approach. And part of that can be because we are prideful creatures. We are human beings. But it's important to think really critically for yourself about the approaches that you're currently using, and think like, okay, are these approaches really working for me? Are they serving me and my goals that I want to reach? If you feel stuck in conflict, which happens to everyone, talk to someone you trust. So like reaching out and phoning someone that you can speak to is generally what I tell folks. That's kind of your first line that you want to go to. It's important here though to think about who are you reaching out to. So I can call my aunt, for example, and I could tell her about something that I did wrong, and she's always going to absolve me. She's always going to think that I've done the right thing. She would probably show up to intimidate people if I like asked her to. She is not a person who I'm going to call to ask if I'm doing or to ask for advice or to ask for accountability because she's a cheerleader to me. So I do have colleagues that I can go to check myself to say, hey, here's my approach so far. Do you think this is okay? Is this the right way? We all need our cheerleaders in our life to get through situations, but we also need people who are going to be real with us. People who can say, hey, I think you might want to think twice about the way that you're approaching this. So be aware about who you're talking to when you reach out to someone that you trust. If there's any behavior which is like actively harming someone or hurting someone, reporting that behavior to the appropriate authority is also something that you can do. It is important to think about the impacts of that though, and thinking about, what happens when you report behavior before doing it, because you can have unintended consequences.
Hey, Daniel, we do
Yeah.
have a quick question here. It says, when do you recommend involving a mediator? Usually most needed when end of life situations are festering and there's no time for timeouts to resolve things.
I see. So as a mediator, I would advise you to request a mediator all the time. No, that's a joke. So generally, like people come to us when things are already on fire. So we had a blow up in front of my attorney, and now my sibling won't talk to me, or I'm unable to even access the house to see my loved one right now. We can mediate things when things are bad. We're here to handle that level of conflict. And we love it when people call us when things are going well and people are getting along, but they need the help of a mediator to help them create that plan. And often it's interesting to find that even folks that are in good relationship can have trouble making those decisions. So I would say you should engage a neutral third party if it's something that you feel like you would benefit from, and if it's worth your time and energy, because it is important to know that it is a time investment. But ultimately, you can call us like before, like proactively, and we love it when people do that. But you can also contact us when things are World War III and anywhere in between. Now, mediation is not a silver bullet. Mediation is not a magic wand. I cannot undo years of resentment and bad communication in 1 2-hour session. But I generally tell folks that mediation is worth a try, regardless of what level that your conflict is at. Now, if you feel as though that you can move through a conversation about end of life and craft a plan without the need of a mediator, then A, bless your heart, but B, we're happy to hear that. We want to support people's ability to handle things on their own, but we are also here, whether it's proactively or reactively, to help you with that.
So you do have one more question, and I know we're interspersing the questions with your presentation, so I think we'll have plenty of time. Next question is, can someone call just to talk?
That's a great question. So it's important to separate what we do from therapy. And while I do personally offer conflict coaching, which is just a one-on-one conversation, calling to talk is not something that generally we don't have the resources right now just to provide peer support or event space, unless it is going to be possibly moving towards a mediation. That being said, though, we are here to field your calls and talk to you about what we can do in that situation. So that is to say, we are a small nonprofit. I want to be careful about our capacity. And we are not a peer support service or therapy. And you're more than welcome to contact us about your situation in order to hear not only if we can approach it, but also other possibilities. So does that make sense? I hope that I answered your question.
You did, and I have a question of my own I'll throw in here. I'm assuming you do some type of triage if someone calls you and you say, you know what, you're really getting into a space where you might need professional support, will you refer to like the health department or grassroots or something like that? How do you handle that?
Yeah, so I mean, we have a lot of community partnerships with other nonprofits that do similar work, like around crisis response, elder care and whatnot. And so, if folks are speaking up about that to us, we can offer to connect them to the services. I am limited in that I cannot give you specific advice or suggestions around, you know, what to specifically do, and we will, let you know about the other resources that we're connected to in the area. So, short answer is yes.
Great, thanks.
Um, all right. So yeah, all of our services are voluntary, neutral, and confidential. So it's voluntary, meaning that say you show up to the mediation and something goes wrong, everything's virtual as of right now. You can leave that mediation anytime you want or need to. And just because you decide to leave a session early doesn't mean that you can't come back to future sessions. So you are there of your own free will, and you're never going to be asked to do or to agree to anything that you don't want to agree to. So it is voluntary. It's also neutral. I like the word non-judgmental a little better. So the mediators are there to listen and ask questions, but we are not there to take sides, establish blame, or tell everyone that they are right or wrong. And it's also confidential. Sorry, just to go back to that really quickly. There's a lot of situations in which I do want someone to tell me if something is right or wrong. Mediation is not one of those spaces. So we are non-judgmental and we want you all to communicate effectively, but we're really just there to make sure that that happens. So to make sure that you hear each other. And lastly, it's confidential. So we are required to report, also just as Maryland residents, we are required to report instances of child abuse, abuse of a vulnerable adult, or a credible threat to do bodily harm. And those are three things that we may not keep confidential. But outside of that, anything else that you say there will stay there. I am going to skip to this last little bit because I'm running out of time. So, open-ended questions. So I wanted to talk about this because this is kind of an art that our society is, I feel like, quickly losing, the art of asking questions. So open-ended questions is any time that you're looking for the most information on a topic, but they can be used well and in conflict for a few reasons. But open-ended questions, I use them on a very regular basis in my own conflicts, but also just like in my own life. But a few things about them, it's all about just gathering as much information as possible. So if I were to ask you, what color is your car? A, I'm assuming that you have a car. B, I'm assuming that it has a color because it might just be rust. C, that not only are those assumptions like very assumptive, but also I'm choosing what information is important for me to listen to. Now, if I say, what does transportation look like for you? Then you're free to tell me, oh, well, sometimes I take a hang glider to work. Other times I drive my motorcycle, and sometimes I like use my off-road unicycle. So you're able to tell me more, and you can also prioritize like what's important for you. In addition, if that person might use public transportation, then you have not stigmatized them by asking them a question about their car. So open-ended questions are about getting the most information possible and letting the other person tell their story. It can also be used to clarify misinformation or clear up any miscommunication. This is a really big one. Wires get crossed all the time, and simple miscommunications can spiral into huge conflicts. You can also use open-ended questions to check your own assumptions. So, hey, I'm feeling like that. I'm feeling like you are, feeling this certain way about me. Is that right? Or can you tell me more about that? To engage people's critical thinking. The lost art of critical thinking. This is something that our society generally doesn't feel like we even have time to think critically sometimes. But when you ask someone an open-ended question, so hey, can you tell me more about like what was that like for you? It gets them to stop and truly think for a second rather than just acting off of reaction. You can also use open-ended questions to see how people respond. If you have some suspicions about, someone and their behaviors, perhaps someone who is caring for your loved one. Asking a closed-ended question can really let them off the hook sometimes when it comes to gathering that information you really need. So instead of saying like, um, "Hey, did you forget to, change my mother this evening?" You could say, "Hey, what did her care look like this morning or this evening? Or what did changing her look like this evening?" Because if you're worried if this person may or may not be untruthful with you, that's an opportunity to see if they are. And I hope that that makes sense. It can also create a pause. Generally, when we're in conflict, we are reacting off of our reptile brain, our brain stem, which is telling us to fight, flight, or freeze. So when we're in conflict, taking a pause, taking a breath, and using an open-ended question can really break up that conflict energy and help folks through that situation. Um, so again, like open-ended versus closed-ended. Open-ended question is, so how did you experience the news that your mother had passed? A closed-ended question is, were you sad when your mom died? So first of all, as you can see, I changed my tone a little bit there, and tone is really important, and I'll get to that in a second. But in the first question, that person might have had a very abusive relationship with their mother. They may be experiencing conflicting feelings of relief that someone has passed after a long suffering. Um, and generally, people are experiencing more than one feeling in any one moment. The closed-ended question is like assumptive, and also it just doesn't really feel good when you say it, and it's a bit of a no-brainer there. But here's some examples of open-ended questions. So, hey, what happened? This is something that I use a lot with my daughter. So recently, she found a lot of makeup that was in my house and painted most of the top half of her body with it. So my initial reaction to that was, why did you do this? And of course, asking people why generally puts people on the defensive and it limits the information that you get. So I was just tried to be calm and said like, hey, what happened? And she was able to tell me that it was something that was really spurned by severe boredom, which I deeply understand. So what happened? How did that event impact you? This third one is one of my favorites. Help me understand what's important to you about that. Can you tell me more? How are you making out? What does day-to-day care look like? Can you share more? Again, all these questions are not assuming anything, and they're leaving the most space for that person to answer. And you can also generally look at the way people answer these questions. So, for the most part, people will prioritize what is most important to them first. So, if you ask people, like, so, hey, what's your day been like today? They're probably going to tell you the most intense thing that happened to them first and then down from there, if that makes sense. I saw a question pop up. If
Yeah, you did have a few. I was going to let you finish up, or do you want to answer them interspersed?
Yep, I am almost done here.
Yeah,
So,
hey, go for it.
so again, tone is vital here. If I had kind of came into my daughter's room and said, "What happened?" That looks way different than like, "What happened?" Having a curious tone versus a accusatory tone can mean everything. You can read these questions in ways that sound very offensive. You're still also going to need to use closed-ended questions sometimes. And it's really strength lies in knowing when to apply which one. Okay, when do I want the full story, or when am I looking just for a confirmation of something? Also, open-ended questions can be heavy. And some folks may freeze up or feel as though they're being investigated. So if you don't have a level of trust with that person and you're just hitting them like straight out the gate with like, so what's the most important to you in end of life care for our parent? They're probably going to clam up and they might not give you the information that you're looking for. So open-ended questions should be asked with care, and they should also be asked like, you need to be prepared. If you ask somebody, hey, what's your day been like? They might tell you the whole thing. So you need to be prepared. Hey, do I have the milk and honey today to ask this type of question to this person? And would I be ready for whatever happens when those floodgates open? Please contact us. Again, it doesn't matter if you are at World War III or if you are somewhere in the planning process. We will talk to you about your situation. Not every situation is good or even appropriate for mediation, but we would be happy to speak to you about whatever situation that is. And again, mediation, it's not a cure-all. I do not have a magic wand, and it's a great way to get the conversation started. I've had a lot of mediations that I've gone to personally that have not ended in an agreement, but at least I walked out of there with the knowledge or the assurance that, okay, this is where my conflict is right now, and I can accept that. So I've been to mediation multiple times, like with my co-parent about where my daughter is going to go to school. Sometimes we don't leave there with an agreement, but at the very least, we can communicate effectively. I can really hear what's important to that other person, and they can hear me. And sometimes that's really unpleasant. Sometimes that's deeply uncomfortable to really hear how someone feels. But it is really only the way through conflict is through it. And your mediators will be there to help you through that process.
Great.
So.
Thanks, Daniel. Helpful information, and I think folks are interested in it. One of the questions is, will we be able to send out the slides?
Yes, indeed.
Great, and I'll just make a note here that anyone that registered for any of our Get It Done sessions will send you the contact info for the presenters, any slides that we can share, and then also the recording. So even if you missed a different session, you'll have access to that. Then you had a question, I'm assuming it's about payment. That's just as premium based, but I'm guessing it's about kind of, does insurance cover? I think you mentioned the sliding scale. So how does that work?
Yeah, generally all of our services are offered for free or on a sliding scale. Really kind of depends on the situation. But generally, like most of the mediation that we're doing around like end of life is free. And as long as one person is a Howard County resident, that's really all we need. Folks can be mediating with someone in California or somewhere else out of state or out of county.
Great. I will see if we get any other questions. In the meantime, I will do this and share my screen again and advise folks that may have joined later at the Speakeasy Howard website, speakeasyhoward.org/getitdone. You can sign up for a couple more slots this afternoon. I think the last I checked, there were still 2 available, at 4 and 4:30. So feel free to visit the Get It Done website and sign up for that. Or actually, we also have a session tomorrow on wills. That's our last session for the week. So with that, I don't think there are any other questions. Any last comments, Daniel?
Yeah, sure. Just a couple of things. So, we all came from the dust, and to the dust we shall return. And death is one of those things that it is the great human experience, and it provokes a lot of extremely deep emotions. And mediation is a place to talk about those emotions. And you don't even have to be in conflict with someone for mediation to work. But just really quickly, so an average 5-year-old asks about 65 questions a day, generally starting with why. Your average 50-year-old asks 6 questions a day. So when you're thinking about your conflicts, I'm just encouraging everyone to be curious, but also please take care of yourself out there. It is a wild world we live in, and if we can help you with any part of your conflict, we're here for that. But please, if this conversation brought up any strong emotions for you, please take care of those with whatever that looks like for you, an incentive, a treat, walk around outside, whatever that looks like for you. I encourage you to do so, and thank you all for being here.
Great. Thank you. Excellent session. Again, we'll make everything available afterwards. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank you.